I now share with you our Old Testament lesson that comes from the book of Daniel. I'll be reading some verses from the 3rd chapter. Listen now to these, God's words. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the precepts, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire." Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and an entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." These are the words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. O gracious and holy God, may the words of my mouth, may the thoughts and meditations resting upon each one of our hearts in these moments, may they all be acceptable to you, you who are today and forever our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The movie Clear and Present Danger is one of those suspenseful, action-packed movies that Harrison Ford is known for doing so well. The movie hit the big screen in 1994. So some of you may have seen it, but you might also have forgotten what it's about. And others of you, perhaps you have never seen it. So let me at least set it up for you, and then we will watch a short clip. The movie is about Jack Ryan, a CIA agent, whom the President of the United States assigns to go up against Colombian drug lords. Ryan has every intention of doing this legally. But his partner, Ritter, sets up a covert military operation behind Ryan's back. By the time Ryan finds out about it, bombs have exploded and quite a few people have died. At the end of the movie, after almost being killed himself, Ryan winds up in the Oval Office. He, the president, and a couple of others are in the office talking about what happened. Ryan confronts the President of the United States about his part in the Colombian mess and the ensuing scandal that was taking place. So I want you to take a look now at this clip.
As acting Deputy Director of Intelligence, it is my duty to report this matter to the Senate Oversight Committee. You're not going to do that? You've got yourself a chip in the big game, huh?
You're going to tuck that away. You are going to save that for a time when your own ass is on the line. And then you're going to pull it out. And I'm going to cash it in for you. Right?
I don't think I have anything more to say to you, sir.
The country can't afford it.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, I don't dance. I think that is one of those really great lines in movie history. And one reason it is so great is that Ryan took no pleasure in saying it. At the very, very end of the movie, he looks miserable as he raises his hand, his right hand, and swears to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to the Senate. If he had been enjoying himself, at that point he probably would have come across as self-righteous. Instead, he came across as a servant of the truth, which was more important to him than his own comfort, his own safety, or reputation. No matter what happened to him in the Oval Office or on the Senate floor, Jack Ryan would not compromise the truth. Now, this morning's movie review leads us to a similar, but much, much older story found in the book of Daniel. I read a bit of it for you just a short while ago. It's a story about 3 Jewish men named Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and the choices they made when faced with threats to compromise their faith. Now, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were Persian names given to them by King Nebuchadnezzar. Their actual Hebrew names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In the first chapter of Daniel, these 3 men were described as young men, without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight. In other words, they were both smart and very good looking. You see, the king had special ordered these 3 men, as well as Daniel and other nobles from Jerusalem, after he had conquered, destroyed, and plundered that holy city. The king wanted to train these best of the best men for his own court. He brought them to live in his royal palace, taught them the Persian language, literature, and he fed them from his royal table. Or at least he tried to. Daniel and his 3 friends stood out from the others because they refused to eat the king's food. Why? Well, because it included food that the Jewish dietary laws didn't allow them to eat. In other words, some of the food was simply not kosher. They might have been conquered royalty from a nation that was no more, but they remained loyal to their faith, to their God. They asked for plain vegetables and water, and they got it. And in fact, we are told that they grew healthy and strong on a diet of vegetables. And when the king examined them after 3 years of this training, he found them to be the very brightest and the best of the young men from Israel. And so he appointed them to the court and relied on their counsel. Now, this earlier food incident really should have been a warning to the king that these young men had other loyalties. But he didn't seem to pay very much attention to it. Sometime later, the king put up a huge golden statue of himself in Babylon. It's described as 9 feet wide and 90 feet high. he invited every VIP in Persia to the dedication ceremony. It was a grand affair, and everyone came. They knew they better come. As all the honored guests arrived, the king's herald told them that when they heard the band begin to play, that they were all to fall down before the statue and worship it. Anyone who failed to do so would have been thrown into the fiery furnace of blazing fire. Now, if any of you have ever taken a pottery class, you know something about what such a furnace might have looked like. It was a large brick kiln with one opening at the top and another at ground level. The kiln was apparently big enough for several people to walk around in when it was cold, and it was big enough to reduce to bones and ashes the same number when it was hot. Death by fire was a common form of capital punishment in those days. So there were likely as many bones in that furnace as pieces of pottery. Well, the furnace was stoked, and the band began to play, and everyone who heard it fell on their faces. Everyone except the 3 Jewish men, who the king had set above all the rest. I expect the king felt humiliated, although that was not their intention. We are told they meant him no disrespect. They simply could not bow down to the statue any more than they could eat the king's food. They served a higher authority, and however grateful they may have been for the king's favor and generosity, their lives did not belong to the king. Their lives belonged to God, and they would worship none other. Even at the risk of embarrassment, of punishment, of death, they would not bow down before a graven image. So filled with rage, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered the 3 men to the front and had the whole procedure explained to them once again. He would dish out some good old intimidation and give them a second chance. Well, according to our story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied politely and yet firmly, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Those 3 Jews did not presume to know what God would do. But the point they wanted to make was that no matter what happened to them, they were going to obey God. They would remain faithful even if they died. Even if no one else ever knew they were right. As far as I am concerned, the high point of this story was right then, when all 3 of them said, "We will not do what you ask." 3 faithful and courageous human beings declared what, for the love of their God, they would not do. They would not compromise their faith. Now, if we continue to read in Daniel chapter 3, we would have soon discovered that the 3 were saved. In fact, after the 3 were thrown into the furnace, the king saw the presence of a 4th man in there with them. Apparently, that 4th person looked a lot like a god to the king, so he was a bit unnerved. He called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out of the furnace. The 3 of them came out, looking really good. And the king was so astounded that he promoted them on the spot. And it was a happy ending. But remember, the 3 men had no idea it would end that way. They were unwilling to compromise, even with the threats of an enraged king and the stoking of a fiery furnace. The same type of uncompromising faithfulness was also seen in Jesus, whose faithfulness led not to a furnace, but to a cross. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake will find it, says Jesus. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life? Jesus, as well as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, reveal to us how easy it is to get on the bad side of others by saying something like, sorry, I don't dance. To someone like Nebuchadnezzar, to someone like Pilate, to any individual who wields power and wants us to dance to their music. Perhaps it's somewhat easier to recognize when we have a real flesh and blood enemy like Nebuchadnezzar to say no to. But then again, people who have power and authority can be so very intimidating. So maybe it's not easier, but it is at least more overtly obvious. However, in all reality, we often find ourselves facing powers that are so much more subtle. We also live in a land not unlike Babylon, a land where those who do not do that which is contrary to the ways and the will of God, and they are often those who thrive and are rewarded in this world. So we can take a whole lot of daily prayer, a lot of daily discernment, just to recognize the foreign gods for what they are. And that's because they often don't seem so much like gods as just the realities of modern everyday life. To recognize such foreign gods, you need to pay very close attention to what is going on inside of you. When someone in a position of authority, or perhaps even a friend, asks you to do something that makes you feel uneasy, look around for the golden statue. When someone asks you to lie about something, or hurt someone, or set up someone, and then suggest that there will be dire consequences for you if you refuse to do it, well, that ball of fear inside of you is likely a sure sign that you are being recruited to worship and serve a false god. When someone or something starts pulling your focus and allegiance away from the one and only true God, revealed most fully through the loving and sacrificial ways of Jesus, well, look up, because that golden statue is probably standing right in front of you. The name of the god does not matter, since it really has no life of its own. Its life comes only from those who have set it up and who are always looking for new converts. As human beings, we have and always will be confronted by such things, by the golden statue, by the fiery furnace, and we will have to weigh that choice. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were. Jesus and his first disciples were. And we also are confronted by it in some way, probably most every day. But I want you to remember that when you are faced with the choice between two gods, it's important, so important, to see the difference. One is 9 feet wide, 90 feet high. It tends to look very impressive, and it's located safely outside the furnace. But it is not real. It is not true. The other is found inside the heat and the flames of the furnace. It is the mysterious presence of the living God who appears to those who do not compromise their faith. Those who choose not to dance to another's tune.